So, this is the brief guide to the critical reading section. And I'm here today with Jack. Jack, you want to say hello?
Hey everyone.
So, thanks for being a part of this little thing. So, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the critical reading section of the SAT. And this is the SAT. I just want to clarify that this is for the SAT that will eventually, be changing. So, some of these methods might work, but this definitely works with the last SAT. Meaning the one that's, finishing in 2015. And I want to just set this up for a second for you, Jack. there's like this incredibly loud sound of something crunching. It's really funny. So I want to set this up a little bit, Jack, and I want to say that I'm not somebody who naturally considers himself great at critical reading. Like when I was 17 years old, I totally hated critical reading. Because for me, I like to read, but I read, when I would read something on the SAT, I'd be like, well, there just aren't enough options. Or I would just feel like none of the answers really made sense. So I had to...
Where I feel I struggled was picking the best. If I got 2 or 3 answers, and I felt I could argue them each in their own way, find the answer they wanted.
Great.
That was my hardest part.
That's something that I'm going to address with this, and I want to come back to that. So if in 15 minutes after I've explained this method, if you feel like you still have a question about that, ask me, because I'm hopefully going to give you a way of thinking about it so that you won't get caught between 2 or 3 answers. But the other thing I'll say about this is that when I had to start teaching critical reading because I was teaching SAT as my job after college, and my boss one day was like, hey, you've got to go in and teach this critical reading class. And I was like, oh, okay. So I had to actually figure out a way to get good at this. And so I would take the test every night with my students before I'd go over it. And I had the answers, and so I'd have to justify them. But I figured out a method that made me a lot faster and a lot more, just efficient at figuring out the answers. And then when I took the SAT, I took a practice SAT a couple years ago, and I got 800 on it. And I was like, oh, okay, I finally figured something out. I didn't miss any of them. So essentially, I'm teaching you this method that I think, and I think I probably scored, I probably scored like a 650 or something on critical reading on verbal in high school. So this is the method that, along with teaching SAT, brought me from 650 to 800. And, when I've taught it to students, I'll set this up one more thing. I'll say that some students have improved 50 or 100 points just by using this. I'm not promising that, but I'm saying that it has happened before. So open up to the possibility that this could be your new approach to critical reading. Okay,
Awesome.
cool. So
I'm excited.
okay, cool. So having said all that, here goes. So it's really a 4-step method. And, I want to set this up by saying, first, the only thing you need to do this is some critical reading section. And in here, we're using the College Blue Board book. So for anyone listening, just as I've instructed Jack, do definitely buy the book, because otherwise it's illegal. So, buy the College Board Blue book. And you don't need the newest one. You can buy the one that's from 2009. This is page 911 and 912. It's just like a random section from the test. And the other thing you need is just a pen to mark up the test, or a pencil. And an open mind. So, okay, here goes. So, first of all, we got this passage, and Jack, you've never seen this passage before, right?
Nope, never seen it before.
Okay, good. And, the other thing you'll need is you'll need just a piece of paper so you can cover up parts of the screen, because I want you to, there are certain things, I only want you to give yourself certain bits of information. So, have you got a piece of paper there and a pen or pencil?
Nope. Got one.
Great. Okay. So, here's how this goes. Now, most people, when they approach a critical reading section like this, what they'll do is they'll come to the first section. And can you see the little hand on the screen? Is that visible to you? Okay.
Yeah.
So they'll look at this and they'll...
Zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, can I zoom in?
Just, one click.
Yep, sure.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. So most sections, most students, what they'll do is they'll come to the first part and they'll read it. And they'll read it, and they're like, well, what was that part? Okay, got it. Read it. And they're kind of reading kind of fast because they're worried about the time, right? And then once they finish reading it, then they'll read the first question. And then they'll read the answers. And then they'll try to whittle it down, and then they'll go back to the passage. And what this method, step 1 of this method, is going to be to actually not read the passage first, but to read the first question. And then we're going to do something with it. So I want you to read the first question. Actually, I'll read it to you. And then here's something specific that I want you to do with it. So the first question says, the purpose of lines 4 to 10 is to blank. So right now, this is a fill in the blank question, and it's kind of hard to memorize a fill in the blank question or to know what it's asking. So all I'm going to ask you to do, step one, is to figure out, what is this question really asking? Like, what are we really looking for here? And the way that you do this is by turning the fill in the blank into a question with an actual question mark at the end. So the purpose of lines 4 to 10 is to, like, what are we looking for there? What's the main word that you would...
Trying to figure out what the whole sentence is about. So we could change this sentence into a question does the purpose, or is the purpose of lines 3 to 4 defending diverse perspectives on race and gender?
Okay.
Look at each answer and make it into a question. Is that right?
And it's even simpler than that. So what I'm looking for is, like, with this question, like, what's the main word in the question if we had to define it?
Purpose.
Purpose. So we're just going to underline the word purpose. Okay, let me do that here. So we're going to take the word purpose and we're just going to go, boom. We're just looking for the purpose. Okay, it's going to be like a squiggly line. Okay, and then go to the next question. The sentence in lines 11 to 12 is best described as... So what are we going to be looking for here?
What it's best described as, or description.
Yeah, some kind of description for it. And then, sorry, I skipped a step. Let me go back a second. Sorry, let me undo both things. It's been a year since I've taught this, so. Okay, so let me go back a second. Okay, so most students, they read the passage first before they go to the questions, but I'm going to suggest that you actually just read the question first. Yeah, well, no, not cold turkey it, but just read the question first, and then and underline the key word in the question. So in this question, for example, the purpose of lines 4 to 10 is to blank. Like, what's the main word there that we're looking for?
In the question, or
just in the question?
Purpose.
Purpose. So we're just going to underline purpose, and then we're going to go to lines 4 to 10, and we're going to make a little mark that goes lines 4 to 10.
And do I want to look in front of lines 4? So let's pretend that this passage wasn't in the middle, or wasn't in the beginning of the reading section. What if it was lines 30 and I had no context of the reading?
For right now, all we're doing is just this thing that I asked you to do. Like, you'll just underline the keyword and then where the answer is going to appear. Okay, so next one. Sentence in lines 11 to 12 is best described as. So we're going to do something like best described as. And then lines 11 and 12. Okay. Next part. The chemistry metaphor in lines 15 to 21. Chemistry metaphor. And then 15 to 21. I'll explain why we're doing this in a second. The author suggests the figurative gesture described in lines 24 to 26 is one of...
Figurative gesture.
That's what we're going to be looking for, the figurative gesture. And then 24 to 26. Great. Notice we're not looking at anything. All we're doing is marking up the passage. 14, the author suggests the explanation for the sad situation in line 32.
So sad situation.
Yep.
Let's go to line 32 and mark that out.
You got it. 32, 31, 32. And you can see it there. It's like the sad situation. And then 15, the tone of lines 37 to 39.
So we're trying to find a tone.
You got it.
And mark it out in 37 and 39.
You got it. 37 to 39. And then 16, Elsa Barkley Brown's article described in the last paragraph emphasizes.
So we have to find a description that emphasizes a certain
something.
Something.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's in the last paragraph. So even though it sounds like kind of a ridiculous thing to mark a whole last paragraph, we're going to just make a little mark there and then mark to there. Okay. So essentially what we've done here is we've done step one. So step one, and I'm just going to share a different part of the screen. 1 second. Actually, I can probably write it right here. Okay. So step one is just mark up the passage. So I'm going to draw this really awkwardly here. Mark up passage. Mark.
Type it out.
Yeah, I tried that. It wasn't working. Let's see. Oh, well, it's not working. Step one is to mark up the passage. I'm going to delete that because it looks horrible. Okay, so step 1, mark up the passage. And that's going to take us about 60 seconds. Like once you've got that down, it might take you as much as 90 seconds. But why do we do that? What have we done here? Well, now if we zoom back, check this out. Here's what we've done. We've created a map that tells you where the answers are all going to be. So for question 10, the purpose is going to be somewhere in here. And to answer your question earlier, will it be maybe a little bit before, a little bit after? Maybe, but generally the answer is going to be right in there. Number 11, the answer is going to be somewhere in here. 12 is going to be in here. 13 is going to be in here. 14, 15, 16, etc. Right? And you know, about 80, I would say 80-85% of the time, that's where you're going to find the answer. And notice they all come in order, and they're all going to be, you're all going to have line markings for those because that's the way the SAT works. So we've created a kind of like already the SAT is an open notes test. This is going to tell you how to find the answer faster. Okay. So step 1, mark up the passage. Step 2, now you might think, okay, now do I read the passage? Not yet. Because step 2, I think, is we really need to understand what we're looking for. So what I'm going to suggest is now go to the first question and we're going to read it. And we're going to turn this question, which is a fill in the blank, into a question that has a question mark at the end. So I'll demonstrate with the first one and I'll let you do the rest of them. So the first one is, the purpose of lines 4 to 10 is to... And the simple question here is, what is the purpose of lines 4 to 10?
Okay.
So step 2 in this process is putting the question in your own words. And the reason that we do this is that now we're going to go back to the passage and we are going to start reading it now. But now we have a question in mind that we're reading for the answer for. So now when I start the passage, I'm reading and all I have to do is keep in mind is, what is the purpose of lines 4 to 10? And the reason I do this is that it tells me that, okay, now I'm never going to skip anything. I'm never going to like jump to lines 4 to 10. And the reason you don't want to do that is because that would be like watching a TV show and someone's asking you like, what's this show about? And they turn it off for the first, like for the intro. And then they turn it on like partway through and they're like, okay. And then they turn it off again. Like, what's it about? Like, you never want to skip this part. Okay. Right. But you want to have something in mind that you're reading with. So it's not just blindly reading it without context. So we're all just keep in your mind, what's the purpose of lines 4 to 10? Okay. Now we start looking at the passage, and we never want to skip the italicized part either, because this is going to tell us of all the topics in all the world. This topic is about blank. This essay is about blank. Okay. So the passage below was adapted from a 1998 book on the history of black women in the United States, written by 2 scholars of African American culture. Okay. So just let's circle, what is the topic of this? That's all we're looking for here.
It's the overall large umbrella topic is United States history, and then it was written on the history of black women
Great.
in the United States.
That's it. So I'm just going to underline that. This is about the history of black women in the U.S. So of all the topics in all the world, it's focusing on the history of black women in the U.S. Great. Now, let's say that even already, like my ADD is kicked in and I forgot what I'm looking for. What am I going to be looking for as I begin this passage?
The purpose of lines 4 through 10.
You got it. And the reason why we're going to keep that a question in mind every time when we're reading is that it makes us goal focused and it gives us something to focus back on if our mind wanders. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to read this, Jack, and I want you to, in your mind, be thinking about, okay, what's the purpose of lines 4 to 10? And let's see if by the time I've read this, you can kind of articulate what the purpose is. And I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. But I'll read this aloud kind of slowly, and you're focused on, okay, what is the purpose of these lines? Why are they here? Okay. We both knew that the story of black women was a remarkable one. Now, do me a favor a second. Cover up the answers, because I don't want you looking at the answers. So take your piece of paper and just cover those up real quick. Okay. We both knew the story of black women was a remarkable one. We also knew that a great many people over the centuries, and even over the last few decades, have not wanted it told. Okay, what's the purpose of these lines? Some have dismissed it, saying it wasn't worth telling. Others have actively suppressed it, afraid of what it would reveal. Still others have tried to deny that there was any story particular to black women. They've insisted that after you've told the story of African Americans and the story of women, you're finished. Black women are included in those narratives. So don't look at the answers yet. In your mind, like, what's the purpose of these lines? Why are they here? What are they doing?
To show that
Okay. So, and when you say they, like who are we talking about here?
The two scholars of African American culture.
So the authors are saying,
Correct.
what are they saying? So there's kind of, let's look at it one more time. Some have dismissed it. And what is this it that they're talking about? Saying it wasn't worth
The
telling.
history of black women.
Right, okay. So some have dismissed the history of black women. Others have actively suppressed it. And still others have tried to deny there was any story particular to black women. So what are these lines doing? Say if you can say it again. What are these lines doing here?
They're communicating to the reader that we haven't really heard the true story of black women or the true history.
That people haven't really, so they're communicating that people haven't really heard the true history of black women. Something like that?
Right.
Okay, great. So now that you've got something in your mind, you've got an answer that you've put in your own words, because that's step 3. Step 1 is mark up the passage. Step 2 is put the question in your own words, meaning turn it into a question with a question mark at the end. What is the purpose? Step 3, before you even look at the answers, is to phrase an answer in your head, and then you look at the answer. So you've said something like, it's people haven't, wanted this story told, or this story hasn't been told for some reason. Okay, now look at the answers. Take a look at the different answers and use your process of elimination and see if you can figure out what the answer is here.
I would say it's between if I was looking big, C, D, and E, and then I narrow it down to D and E.
Okay, cool. So you've crossed off A, B, and C, and you're between D and E. So it's either presenting a sample of views held by black women or noting the different kinds of resistance to a historical topic.
But
Okay,
we only
go ahead.
so we know that there were three types of counter resistance you could talk about. They say they dismissed it. They said it wasn't worth telling, and that they said others were afraid what it would reveal. But we don't know that if this is a view held by black women.
Good. We don't know if it's a view held by black women.
So if you were assuming, you could maybe put D, but that information isn't in the passage, so we have to cross it out.
You're right, 100%. Good. So you mark E, and E is correct. And if we check this, are there different kinds of resistance to a historical topic? Yeah, the historical topic is the history of black women. And the resistance, some have dismissed it, others suppressed it, some tried to deny it. So those are different kinds of resistance to this historical topic. Got it. Great. Now, I would posit that you were able to come to that a little bit faster because you had already formulated in your mind what you were looking for. And that may be kind of an obvious, simple thing, but I'll tell you, if you didn't have something in your mind before, if you did what I used to do and what students do a lot, which is after you read the question, you kind of start to look at the answers to just kind of judge them based on how they're worded without really knowing what the passage is saying, it's a lot easier to get tripped up by these other answers, especially if you're reading fast. Like you hear black women, let's say you just skimmed the passage and you read black women in the topic, you might be like, oh yeah, that's maybe what black women thought. You might be tempted to pick D. Okay. But because you did a close reading based on something specific that you were looking for, you were able to find the right answer. So let's try it again. So again, cover up the answers. And then this time I'll read the question aloud and then you put it in your own words, just a really simple phrasing of it. Okay. So the sentence in lines 11 to 12 is best described as.
What best describes the sentence in lines 11 through 12?
Great. Right. What best describes, or how do we best describe this sentence? Exactly. Now, what I might do in this situation is I might peek just to see how long the answer is. So let's just look to see how long the answer is. Okay, so it's just a couple words. Great. Okay, so now, what best describes lines 11 to 12? How would we describe this sentence? Now, what I'm going to do here is, rather than jump straight into 11 to 12, I just want to take 2 seconds to recap what I've read so far. So far, this is about the history of black women, and there are a lot of people who haven't wanted their story told. Okay, so that's what we know so far. And then, how would we best describe this sentence? So people haven't wanted their story told, but, now I'm reading 11 to 12. No matter what anyone may say to the contrary, black women are different. And then it goes on. They're different from black men and they're different from white women. But we're just looking at that lines 11 to 12. So people haven't wanted their story told, but no matter what anyone may say to the contrary, black women are different. you can kind of hear a tone there. You can kind of hear something in that. And don't look at the answers yet, but if you had to describe like what the feeling is there, what that thing is doing, like what's that line doing? Like
it's setting up the rest of the passage for that, almost explain it, that we're going to talk about the history of black women because they're different. They do want their story told.
Good. I like that. And if you had to like tie this to like a physical gesture, like if you had to imagine that this is a person giving a speech and they've just set it up in that first paragraph with this line 11 to 12, what physical gesture might they be doing when saying this, this line?
Using their hands more.
But no matter what anyone may say to the contrary, black women are different. And would it be like using their hands to like shrug, or would it be like using their hands to like do like a so-so sign, or would they be like, what would they be doing with their hands?
They would probably be using them to show power, or maybe set them down or move them around. But it would not be gestures that are shrug. So it would be a gesture of power.
Gesture of power, right? Something like, pointing with their finger, or like, slamming with their fist or something. And the reason, that's kind of an abstract way of looking at this, but I like to get students to visualize what's happening and how the speaker might be saying it, to sort of start to picture tone, because then you can get a sense of what the speaker is really doing with each of these lines. So how would you describe, just in a couple words, this sentence? Like what is this sentence?
I'd say it's a tone shift, and it's also an introduction to the rest of the passage.
Yeah, and if let's see, so the sentence is best described as and so in terms of the tone, like what is this new tone? What is the author doing in this part?
It's a powerful tone.
Yeah, so it's like so what would you call a powerful tone? It's is it a question? Is it
No, it's a statement.
It's a statement, like a powerful statement?
Right, it's an assertive statement.
Yeah, something like an assertion or a powerful statement. Okay, and I'm comparing it with that. I mean, I'm linking it with that hand gesture. So it's like a powerful statement, an assertion, or something like that. Okay, now take a look at the answers.
So we have answer A is an assertion. Answer B is an apology. C is a decision. B is a concession, and E is a criticism.
What do you think?
I think if I had to narrow it down, it would between, if I hadn't just done what we did and I was taking a normal test, I would say A and C. But after doing what we just did, I think it's A.
Yeah, it's basically what you said. And I don't know if you like subconsciously saw it or whatever. It doesn't matter. Like you knew that this was a powerful statement. And, yeah, the one with decision, it's like, well, there's nothing that the person's having to decide, right? So great, you got it. Now, when you get something right on like that, it is a good idea to just read the others just to make sure, just to be safe. But what will happen with this method is sometimes you're just going to straight up guess what the answer is. Like, because what you're doing is you're basically reverse engineering the way the test was created. So when the question writer read this passage, he or she went, oh, this might be a good place for a question, and then formulated a question around it, and then thought, okay, what would my answer be? And came up with the right answer, and then had to come up with all these answers that were clearly wrong. So essentially, you're reverse engineering. You're going through that same process, but a little bit faster. So great. Let's try it again. Number 12. And this goes a lot faster usually when I'm not talking through it, but we're taking our time now. So the chemistry metaphor in lines 15 to 21 is used to. So number 12. How would you turn this into a question in your own words?
What is the chemistry metaphor in lines 15 through 12 used for?
Used for. Good. That's key, right? Because it's kind of like what type of question is this? It's not just a straight comprehension question.
Right. You have to analyze. You have to figure out what the chemistry metaphor is first, and then you have to figure out what it's used for.
Exactly. Great. And what it's used for means that this is a purpose question. So you're trying to figure out like, what is the purpose of the chemistry metaphor? Like, in other words, what is it used to do in the service of the passage? Okay, great. And you got that in your head. So what is the chemistry metaphor used for? So we go back to the passage now, and really quick, what is it about? It's about the history of black women. Many people haven't wanted their story told, but black women are different. They're different from black men, and they're different from white women. It's true that much of what they've experienced derives from racism and much from sexism. Okay, so now there's going to be some kind of chemistry metaphor coming up, and we're trying to figure out what the purpose of it is. Again, don't look at the answers. Let's see. At the same time, however, much of what black women have experienced and still experience today, bad and good, involves the blending of their separate identities in a way that chemists would call a combination, not just a mixture. Both race and gender are transformed when they're present together, and class is often present as a catalyst. Okay, that's kind of complex. So let's read that one more time. So what is this chemistry metaphor used to do here? What's its purpose? So at the same time, the author writes, much of what black women have experienced and still experience today, bad and good, involves the blending of their separate identities. Now, what's a black woman's separate identity according to this author? Like what might those separate identities be?
That they have a race identity and a gender identity.
Great, you got it. So this is saying that this involves the blending of their separate identities in a way that chemists would call a combination, not just a mixture. And even if we don't know what that means, we can look at the next sentence. Both race and gender are transformed when they're present together. Now, if you had to take your hands and like symbolize what's going on here, and you'll have to describe to me what you're doing, like how would you describe what's happening according to this passage when they're combining their two identities? Like what's going on?
The catalyst speeds up a reaction, so
right. Yeah, and so these two things, race and gender, it says that they're transformed when they're present together, as opposed to, as opposed to what? Like as opposed to, I guess, just them sitting side by side, right? When race and gender, they're transformed. You said there's like an explosion. Like what's happening to race and gender in that explosion?
That they make each other, that they both become stronger almost, or they become stronger identities.
Okay, yeah. So something is happening to either make them stronger or maybe just like what? Like it's like, is it separating their identities? Is it, it's saying it's combining them. So what does that mean? It's like
that they're no longer just black and they're no longer just a woman.
Yeah.
And they're it's a black woman.
Yeah, it's like this new entity or something. And I'm with my hands, like one of my hands is race, one is gender, and I'm like combining my two hands so that they're folded. Or like you could imagine the two hands coming together and kind of like swirling around, to kind of create this mixture or this.
That's what I was doing.
Yeah, great. So they're like this. It says that they're a combination, not just a mixture. So they're not just mixed up; they're combined, right? So that's kind of the slow way of doing this. But now we've got this. That's okay. Now we've got this like combination of things, and we've got this thing that's kind of swirling around in our minds. We've got this image. Okay, so now let's look at the chemistry metaphor answers and see what we can find. And you don't have to read them aloud. You can just look at them on your own and see if you can pick one. What's got you picking A?
So, if you look at the illustrating the connection between scientific and historical studies of race, class, and gender, there's nothing about scientific studies or historical studies yet in the passage.
Okay.
C is saying identify the agents for change in a particular social transition. There's so far been nothing in the passage about a social transition.
Great.
And then D suggests the way certain influences interact to produce a unique perspective. This could be it, but I don't like the whole unique perspective.
Okay.
But
So great.
Maybe that reading D, I think when I was looking at it, it was between A and D.
Between A and D. Okay.
I don't believe this passage isn't meant to show the similarities between racism and sexism.
Great. So we've crossed off E, we've crossed off C, we've crossed off B. So we're between A and D. So, whoops, sorry, that looks like yeah, okay. So we're between A and D here. So A is characterize the challenges faced by some groups of people, and D is to suggest the way certain influences interact to produce a unique perspective. Okay, so I want to address that thing that you said at the beginning, Jack, about when you come to two answers, like how do you solve it? Here's how I wouldn't say solving it. I wouldn't say pick up each of the answers and try and prove both of them. Because then you can, I mean, you're really creative and your mind is able to like make all these connections that are maybe separate from the passage. So instead of that, I want you to do the Men in Black thing where you like erase your memory of what the answers are. And I want you to go back to the passage and just look at it based on what's there. Okay. And let's just see what's really there, because maybe we missed something. And let's just see what we find. So what is the purpose of this chemistry metaphor? We go back. Now we see at the same time, however, much of what black women have experienced and still experience today, bad and good, involves the blending of their separate identities in a way that chemists would call a combination, not just a mixture. Both race and gender are transformed when they're present together, and class is often present as a catalyst. So again, we've got this, if we try to like bring this to life in the visual sense, we've got these two separate things coming together, creating a combination. And that when that combination is created, that race and gender are transformed. So we've got that image in our heads. And I wonder if, let's look back at the answers A and D.
I mean, looking back on it after you said that, and if I did the Men in Black thing and remove all previous, because A is one of those answers that I feel it's like an underdog answer, and then I want to try and, argue it and fight for it and say, no, it could be this, but what you just said, that makes me think D.
And what about what I said made you think D? So A characterized the challenges faced by some groups of people. Is there any?
It also says groups now, and I realize that we're just talking about one group.
Right. That's the thing. That's the little thing that doesn't make it general. It makes it wrong, because we're not talking about some groups of people. We're talking, like you said, about one group. So the answer here is D, to suggest the way certain influences interact. And what were the influences that are interacting?
Their race and gender.
Yep. And to produce a unique perspective. So the unique perspective is what? Like, where do we see evidence of that?
Towards the...
Like, what is the unique perspective that they then have?
That black women have?
Yeah, and that's the answer, right? It's the unique perspective that black women have, right? It's this combination, right?
Right.
It's the way that race and gender are transformed.
Transform, and that when they come together, it's almost like a catalyst.
Yeah. Class is present as a catalyst to produce this unique perspective. Cool. Let's do it again. So wait, here are the four steps one more time. So number 1, we're marking up the passage. And like I said, that takes about a minute or 2. Step 2, we're putting the question in our own words. Step 3, you're putting the answer in your own words. And then once you have the answer in your own words, essentially you're just playing a matching game. You're matching up the answer in your head with the answer that's already, that's here for you. But here's the important step. Between steps 3 and 4, so what I mean by that is like between when you come up with the answer in your own head and you go look at the actual answers that they've written for you, you have to be really patient. This is where you'll spend most of your analysis time. Okay. And it's really important that you don't rush ahead, that you don't think, oh, I think I kind of have some idea of it. Let me just rush and look at the answers because I'm running out of time. You have to be really patient with your analysis, because if you rush through that part, that's when you'll be more apt to pick, for example, A instead of D, because you haven't done proper analysis. If your answers, if 2 or 3 are still looking good to you, it's because you haven't either analyzed the question correctly or you haven't analyzed the passage thoroughly enough. And so when you get in a situation like that, go ahead and cross off the ones that you can cross off, and then just go back and reanalyze it. And again, try and forget what's there, because what happens is if you start to like try and argue for the underdog answers, what'll happen is it'll start to merge. The passage, which is good evidence, and the answers, which are bad answers, are going to start to like meld in your head, and you'll start to like mix them up. And it becomes like all just one bit of text that you can't separate the good from the true stuff from the stuff that they've made up. Another way of thinking about this is if I were to tell you that each of these, let's say like here's a kind of a metaphor. Like let's say I were to tell you, Jack, that you're getting ready to go into a room and there are going to be 5 people in that room, and each of those people represents one of these answers, A, B, C, D, and E, and you're going to shake hands with one of these people. Now, one of these people, if you shake hands with the right person, they're going to give you $1 million. If you shake hands with any of the other 4 people, they've got poison on their hands and you will instantly die. But here's the thing. If you wait long enough, there's going to be a fax coming out that's going to give you the picture of the person that you need to shake, whose hand you need to shake. If you've ever seen The Usual Suspects, it's like the picture of Kaiser Soze is coming through the fax. Okay, all you need to do is wait for that fax. Now, some people will be like, whatever, I'm just going to take my chances. I'm going to go into the room and just start shaking hands, right? I'll just be able to tell just by like the expression on their faces, right? But what I'm suggesting is wait for the facts, right? Do your analysis so that you have a really clear idea of exactly what you're looking for. And then it's just boom. As soon as you walk in the room, you'll recognize if it is or isn't the person whose hand you're supposed to shake. Okay, that's kind of a weird metaphor, but it seems to land for people. Okay. Let's do this a couple more times, see if we can land this. So, and I wouldn't suggest that you like launch into the test, like if you're taking it next week and doing this. Like I would suggest practicing this with a couple sections in the book so that you get used to this new method. And essentially what this method boils down to is most people read the passage first, and then they go to the question and they read the answers. What I'm suggesting is do your analysis of the question, do your analysis of the passage, and then look at the answers. So rather than going 1, 2, 3, I'm suggesting go 1 and then 2 and then 3. And that you wait between 2 and 3. And by wait, I just mean like that's where you're going to invest most of your time. Okay, let's do it again. So now you might be reading this thing, hearing me thinking like, gosh, this is going to take forever. It takes a little bit longer at first, but what it ends up happening is it ends up refocusing your attention and your energy in the right place so that your analysis ends up being better. Okay, so the author suggests that the figurative gesture described in lines 24 to 26 is one of blank. So how could you turn this into a question that you could like wrap your mind around that you could easily understand?
What is the figurative gesture in lines 24 through 26?
Close. Look at it one more time. It's not what is the gesture.
What does a gesture describe?
What does it describe? Read it really closely.
The author suggests that the figurative gesture described, in lines 24 through 26
is one of.
So I have to figure out what the figurative gesture, what kind of literary device it is.
And normally, I mean, that'll be on the AP test, but it won't be on your SAT. They won't ask what kind of literary device. The author suggests that the figurative gesture described in lines 24 to 26 is one of, so it's not a what question, actually. The author suggests that the figurative gesture described, because if you were to go that, you would be like, what is the figurative gesture? But it's not actually looking for what is the gesture itself. Look at, just kind of glimpse at some of the answers.
Is it kind of like question, if we go back up, question 2 or 11? Or is that 11?
Yeah, it is kind of like that. The author suggests the figurative gesture described in lines 24 to 26 is one of, and if you kind of glimpse the answers, like what is it asking about the figurative gesture? Is it asking what the gesture is? No, it's asking
to describe it.
Yeah. So it's not what is the gesture, it's how is the gesture described. Do you see the difference? We're not looking for like, we're not looking, yeah. Oh, it's okay. We're not looking for what is the gesture. We're looking for how do we describe that gesture? Right? So it's like,
Right.
so the difference would be like what the gesture is would be like shrugging shoulders. How the gesture would be described would be like, it would be like a gesture of uncertainty. Okay. So the reason, that's why it's important. And that's why I take students through a step of like analyzing the question, because it could be that you're maybe looking for the wrong thing when you're reading the passage. Okay. That's all. So we're looking for something more like, how would we describe this gesture? Okay. So back to the passage. How do we describe this gesture in lines 24 to 26? So we go, okay, history of black women. People haven't wanted their story told, but black women are different. When they combine their separate identities, it becomes this like new thing, this new perspective. And what I'm doing by doing that is I'm like linking like things that I already know the answer to. Like I know that this is good, solid reading because I've answered questions on these. Unfortunately, both black men and white feminists have sometimes seen this separate identity as threatening. And so let's just imagine for a second, black men on one side and white feminists on another side. And they're being threatened in the middle by black women. Okay? Many members of both groups want to put their arms metaphorically around the black woman's shoulder and say, she's with us. Black women are sought after by black historians and white feminist historians, by black political leaders and by white feminist political leaders. But their inclusion is provisionary. They will be valued for their difference so long as they don't mention it too often. It just makes people feel nervous and guilty. So I read past it a little bit just to see if we could get some more context, and I do that sometimes. But how would we describe this gesture? So we've got black men on one side, white feminists, and what is the gesture? It says many members of both groups want to put their arms metaphorically around the black woman's shoulder and say, she's with us. Now, let's just analyze this. Like, why would, before we look at the answers, why would black men and white feminists want to put their arms around her metaphorically and say, she's with us? Why am I...
Sorry. Is it for, are we talking in politics, or are we just talking in general? Because it could be for political gain.
Political gain? Okay, in what sense would they, how could they gain politically? Like, what would be the purpose of putting their arms around her and being like, she's with us?
They look good, and they also, more members
Right.
that support their ideals.
Right. So how would you describe that gesture then? It's a...
They're trying to be affectionate, or
they're trying to be affectionate? Why?
Because
they really... Is it because they really like black women?
No, it's because they want the gain out of it.
Ooh, so it feels... How does that feel to you, like in your body? Like when you think about someone putting their arm around you like that, how does that feel?
It feels good if it's genuine, but if it's not genuine...
Yeah, and so like...
cheated out.
Yeah, it feels like kind of creepy, right? Like they're putting your arm around you like, yeah, she's with us. And it's like, oh, I don't know, am I? Right, so there's like kind of this weird feeling around it. Okay, so how would we describe this gesture? Take a look at the answers now.
So not B. Oh, it could be B. But you're not just, if you were talking about the different both parties. A looks good. C does not look good because it uses the word genuine.
So we know it's not genuine. Yeah, is it a positive? So
it's not arrogant.
yeah. And so you know that it's not a positive one already. So we can cross off these genuine empathy and uncommon courage, right? And then overt arrogance doesn't seem to make sense. You're right. So we're between A and B. So misguided affection and calculated self-interest. So let's go back to the passage a second. So both black men and white feminists have sometimes seen this separate identity as threatening. Many members of both groups want to put their arms metaphorically around the black woman's shoulder and say, she's with us. Black women are sought after by black historians. Why? And white feminist historians, by black political leaders and white feminist political leaders. You've said why. Like, why might they want to do it?
To get more gain.
To get more gain, right? To get more people on their side, to like support their cause, right? Okay, so is it misguided affection or is it calculated self-interest? Let's look at one by one. What does misguided affection mean?
That it's affection, but it's not truly genuine.
That's a good guess. It's not quite what misguided means. I'm gonna give us a quick definition for misguided. I'm just gonna use my Mac dictionary. Bring that. Obviously, you won't be able to do that in the test, but let me give them. So misguided means having or showing faulty judgment or reasoning.
So I think here this is so far the closest two answers we've had.
Yeah, and in this case, is there some faulty judgment or reasoning? Like, reason that they're hugging her. They're hugging her for, like they thought they were hugging her for this reason, but they're actually wrong.
Right. Yes.
Or are they? Is this some part of like? Do they have a self-interest, and they're hugging her because they're trying to sort of?
They do, but I wouldn't call it a calculated.
What does calculated mean to you?
That they've planned it out, one to end, step by step, and that they think from, okay, if we support them, we're gonna get this amount of voters or this amount of support.
Really? Why wouldn't you think that?
Why would I or why wouldn't I?
Why wouldn't you think that?
What do you mean?
You just said you wouldn't think that it was calculated. What's making you think that it's not calculated?
Because they don't know how much. Calculated means that they're gonna get. They know think they know how much they're gonna get out of it. They're just kind of shooting for it and hoping for the best.
Okay. So this one, the answer is B. And I don't know that, even if they don't know what they're going to get out of it, I think there is a suggestion that because they have a political agenda or some sort of agenda, that they're basically, this gesture is one of self-interest, and they're doing it for a reason that suggests, yeah, we're going to get something out of this. Like, we're doing this for us rather than the person that we're hugging. Misguided affection. Misguided basically means you were faulty in the way that you were judging something. And I don't know that it's, affection, because they don't actually, it's not like they thought, oh, we're hugging her, but then we realized there was like that we shouldn't have been hugging her, or like there was some reason not to hug her. In this case, the key here is this notion of self-interest. So, let me jump forward a little bit. Actually, I don't know that we need to go through all these. You can go through these kind of on your own. But this is what we're about. And as you'll see, it's not going to magically be like, oh, boom, all the answers automatically come. But what it does do is it kind of reorients the way that you process the information. Now, let me ask you this. Is there anything does this line up with what you've done in the past, or does this go against anything that you've done in the past, or what do you take from this?
When I first did an SAT prep course, they had me do something like this, but I wouldn't. It didn't make as much sense. So I felt like it was everything like you just said, but they wouldn't have me ask. I wouldn't come up with an answer in my head, and I wouldn't ask a question from the statement or question they gave me, if that makes sense.
Right.
So it was only doing half the steps, and I felt, okay, there's no way this works.
Okay.
So I just kept doing the old way.
Cool. Got it. And what was the old way?
How you described.
Passage, then the question, and the answers.
The question, and then trying to guess from the passage.
Right. So yeah. So essentially, this is the thing that I want to suggest for you for the coming week or two, or whenever you're practicing this, is rather than going PQA, like passage, question, answers, I want you to go question, passage, answers. And like I said, be really patient around that passage time, and just time yourself. Like when you do a section of the SAT, when you do especially when you're working on critical reading, just time yourself on those 25-minute sections, and and right at the top. And if you go a little bit over the first couple times, 29, 28, see if you can start to do this, but just get a little bit faster. I don't care if you go over on time. I just want to make sure that you're doing good analysis and good work, and you'll start to get an inner alarm of when you need to okay, quick, bail on and just go for the answers and stuff, or try this. I want you to try this week, or this next couple weeks. On a couple different critical reading sections, and see how this works. Now, something that you asked at the beginning was, what if it comes way later in the passage? Well, they're never going to come out of order. Unless you're on a double passage. Sometimes you'll have questions on passage 1 and then passage 2 and then questions that ask on both. And you can do the analysis one at a time. So you can do the questions for passage 1, then you can do the questions appropriate for passage 2, and then you can do the questions that have you doing both. You'll need to, obviously, by the time you're answering those questions that are on, looking at both of the passages, you'll need to have read both of them and analyze them. And if you find a question early on that's compare both of the passages, and I'd say circle that question and then come back to it. Just as if you have a question at the beginning, let's say number 10 was the purpose of the passage as a whole is to blank, I would say circle that one and come back to it at the end, because that's when you'll have the most information about how to answer that question. So you don't have to read the whole passage first. But essentially what I'm suggesting is kind of radical in that, and I don't suggest that you do all tests like this or that you read like this, but the purpose of the SAT is to go in and find the information that you need in order to answer the questions. And so I'm suggesting that you don't actually need to read the whole passage first, that you actually can do your analysis along the way, just based on the way that it's structured. And I want you to try it. And if it doesn't work for you, don't use it. If you're a student who's scoring in the 750 or 780 range, and you're reading the passage and then reading the question, then you've already got the passage memorized and you know how it goes. You don't need to mess up something that's not working. But if you're kind of in that, 650 range or so, 600 to 700 range, I would say, this can be the thing that jumps you up. The last thing that I'll say about jumping up your critical reading score is vocab. Oftentimes, knowing the difference between like what misguided affection means versus like what calculated self-interest means. The service that I love is Membean, MEMBEAN, for vocab, and just drilling vocabulary there is a really great one. It makes it feel not even like a drill. It makes it feel kind of fun because you get all the words in context and that sort of thing.